This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's lovely to all be here today. As Justin said, it really is a privilege to take this time out of our busy lives to reset, I guess, to realign our lives with God's purpose for us. And it's lovely to see everyone here. It's lovely to have a few mainlanders visiting with us, and welcome to everybody who is online today as well. So before I begin this exhort, pardon me, my voice is a bit raspy. I should probably preface it by, normally when I do an exhort, I like to mull over a few ideas for a wee while, do a little bit of reading. Then I like to kind of regurgitate all of those ideas. And then there's a really important process of refinement that comes after that. And hopefully at the end you have something reasonable. It seems this week God's plans were quite different from the plans I set out for my life. So there's been a bit of regurgitation, not as much refinement as I would like. So with that, take this talk in that context. So the last time I was up here, the talk that I did was a topic that was very important for me at the time. It was about finding meaning. It was about finding meaning in life, and importantly, trying to find meaning in suffering. And for me, at that point in my life, it was a very cathartic experience. It gave me the opportunity to really reflect, and pulling that talk together was a really useful process for me to go through. It was a chance to unpack a particularly challenging time in my life. It was a time to reflect, to regroup, and refocus. And I guess in that talk, I was looking into mankind's deep desire for meaning. And when I was discussing that, I was thinking about just man in a natural state. What is often referred to as that God-shaped hole, that nations everywhere, despite how remote, all seem to develop some sort of spiritual awareness, some sort of culture that focuses on what is beyond. I also briefly mentioned the nihilism that people tend to find when there is nothing to live for beyond this existence that we experience. And I guess I was Googling a lot of these topics. I was doing a lot of reading, and the powerful algorithms that be decided that I was a great candidate to listen to a certain podcast, which I admittedly am now about 20 hours deep in and loving it. So I want to do a quick plug, and this isn't actually really related to the topic today, but the podcast that I'm listening to is called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God by Justin Brierley. And essentially, this podcast looks at the new atheist movement that sort of came out post 9/11, a real push against the Christian culture that had, I guess, essentially been a foundational concept in the West. And I really, really recommend that people, if you're interested in the topic, maybe have a listen to it. There's a book if you prefer reading. But pretty much the key talking point in that is that this atheistic movement, while it pulled back from Christianity and that uniting force, there was nothing to actually fall into its place. And now we live in a society that is devoid of meaning. We have so many people reaching out and searching for it. So that little sideline's not really related to what I'm going to talk about today. But while working on that exhort, there was another topic that seemed inextricably linked to the search for meaning in our lives and the search for a higher power. And it seems to me as though our search for meaning, our search for something more, is often kicked off or exacerbated by the fact that we're only too aware that our time in this existence and on this planet is limited. James 4 verse 14 says that we are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Death, mortality, is the great equalizer. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, whether you're rich or whether you're poor, no matter even what you believe, we are all born into this world, and sooner or later we make our exit. And in Psalm 90 verse 7, we read, the length of our days is 70 years, or 80, if we have strength. Yet their span is but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. So I realize this sounds like it's going down a really dark hole, and admittedly, I did find myself going down a bit of a rabbit hole. And this topic that I'm going to cover today is certainly a rabbit hole, far more so than I ever anticipated. Um, so when we look at it that way, we've got somewhere in the vicinity of 80 years in this existence, all going well at best. 80 years to be born, 80 years to grow, 80 years to learn, 80 years to procreate, 80 years to hopefully find meaning. And then it's over, at least from a mortal sense. Within that period, we need to discover our purpose. So the reading today was Ecclesiastes, and as I mentioned last time, Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books in the Bible. I don't reference it once here because I pretty much spent the entire time in it last Exhort, but it is very relevant to what we're talking. So when we think about time, what is time? What do we actually know about time? It's something that we encounter every day. This morning, I thought I had a little bit more time to get here than I did. We probably all set alarms to get here. Our whole lives are dictated by time. It's how we show up to school, to uni, to work, to appointments. We know when it's time to eat. We know when it's time to go home. We know when it's time to sleep. Time is an inescapable aspect of this existence. And this brings, I do actually quote Ecclesiastes 3. This brings to mind Ecclesiastes 3. Oh, wait, no, I won't read them out this time, as I did in my last talk. However, it's one of my favorite passages in the Bible that we did go through about that there's a time for everything. So if you jump onto the trusty old reliable source of Wikipedia and you type in time, you'll see that it's actually, for me, it was just surprisingly difficult to define. Distilling it to its core elements, according to Wikipedia, time is defined as the continued sequence of existence and events that occurs in apparently irreversible succession from the past through to the present and into the future. So there's essentially three components in that, and that seems pretty straightforward. Time is linear. Time is the past, time is right now, and time is our future. And due to the very nature of time, we can't help but see this world as finite. In our experience, everything that we experience has an ending. Our own lives, as I mentioned earlier, certainly, but it extends further to everything, to ideas, ideologies, to, powers and states. It seems that pretty much everything comes, has its time, and everything goes. And as we look around in secular society as well, we're all aware of this. We're all inherently aware that there are dangers out there, existential dangers, climate change, apocalyptic war. Even secular culture is obsessed with the end. And there are many differing schools of thought when it comes to time from a secular perspective. And there are those that think that time began with the Big Bang. There are those that think that time pre-existed the Big Bang. So time is actually an incredibly complex topic and something that is very much a rabbit hole to go down for several, nights in a row, reading all sorts of weird things. But when you do, you will come across, elements of physics. You will come across philosophers. You will come across elements of theology as well. So Isaac Newton contributed greatly to our understanding of time. His theory was widely accepted by many from the 17th century through to the 20th century. Newton believed that time itself was absolute, that time exists independently of any perceiver, i.e. us. Time exists in the background and progresses at a constant pace throughout the universe. Newton believed that time was imperceptible and could only be understood mathematically. So according to this theory, the only way we can perceive time is through observing objects in motion, such as the sun, the moon, and the stars. From these movements, we infer the passing of time. Does that make sense? As I mentioned, this was quite a rabbit hole, and I do apologize if this really doesn't appeal broadly. I did have a lot of fun reading this stuff. That was very bizarre. So yeah, certainly opening a confusing can of worms here. But Newton is essentially postulating that time flows at the same speed throughout the universe and is in no way dependent on physical or any other processes that occur within it. Time is absolute, and while it's currently, 11:25 here in Auckland, and it's time for meeting, under this understanding of time, thousands of light years away on planet whatever, it is still 11:20 at this exact point in time. That time is all going along one track, essentially. So the late great Albert Einstein produced his theory of relativity in 1905, and look, I've got to admit, I've done a couple of Wikipedia skims on it. It's beyond me, I'll admit that. But it does form the basis for the modern scientific understanding for time. So according to this theory, time does not exist in isolation, but is enmeshed with space in itself. You may have heard of the space-time continuum. Time is also relative rather than absolute, and the speed and the flow of time depends on the reference point. So for example, imagine that someone was watching a train go past. Right as the train was midway past, it was struck by lightning at both the front and the back. To the observer, who is looking from the side of the railway tracks, it would appear as those lightning strikes would have been simultaneous. They hit at the same time. However, someone sitting at the midpoint in that train would perceive the strikes as consecutive rather than simultaneous. And we're talking microseconds here. The light from the rear of the train has to travel the length of the train in addition to the distance that the train was moving in that instance. So the first observer was correct in terms of those lightning strikes were simultaneous at the same time as the person sitting on that train was correct in that they were not simultaneous. So pretty mind-bending stuff, and I'm going to end all the weird stuff there, hopefully. Anyway, so scientists have obviously wrestled with time for a very long time, and many philosophers have, and I think it would be rude not to mention a few of the biggies. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato noted time as a moving likeness of eternity. Aristotle stipulated that time is a measure of movement, that the past no longer exists, the future does not exist yet, and the present is the moment of unity between being and non-being. I'm sure that makes all perfect sense to you. One I liked as well, a bit of a wild card left of field, was German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who threw out a theory that time itself did not exist and was merely the way that our brains organize information in a way that we could interpret and understand it. So time is absolutely not a simple topic. We all experience time, but what is it? So we've had a really quick look at what some scientists and philosophers have to say on the matter. But what does the Bible say? So the concept of time is first introduced in the Bible really early on. In Genesis 14, 1 verses 14 to 19, we read, "And God said, let there be light in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light to the earth." So what do we have here? It's the very first chapter in the Bible, and it appears to tell us that time itself was created by God. And the implication of this is that God himself is not subject to time. In Isaiah 57 verse 15, we read, "For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy." So God inhabits eternity. And eternity is essentially the antithesis of time. It's defined as infinite or unending time. And the psalmist in Psalm 90 says in verse 2, "Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." And a fun little observation that I came across in an article, I'll just throw in here without making too much of a comment on it myself. But according to the theory of relativity, at the speed of light, time essentially stops. At the speed of light, there is essentially eternity or infinity. And we read in 1 John 1 verse 5 that this is the message we have heard from him and declare to you. God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. So if God is light and time does not exist at the speed of light, then God is not subject to time. So what does that mean for us? We live within the confines of this mortal existence. We live with the idea that everything has a beginning, is, and then is not, no matter what it is. So what does it mean for us that our Creator is not subject to that very time? Our Creator essentially exists beyond it. And it's kind of difficult to actually get a picture of that in your head to really understand it. And it really does push the limits of our earthly capacities. But try and think about it for a second. The concept of time, of things beginning and things ending, is a concept that exists exclusively within our lived experience within creation. But for our Creator, there is no time, there is no beginning, there is no end, and He is beyond it all. So understanding this does have some interesting implications. The Lamb's Book of Life is mentioned in many places in the Bible, as early as Exodus and many times in Revelation. The Book of Life is believed to contain the names of the righteous before God. But here's the interesting thing. The Book of Life exists beyond our creation and is therefore not subject to time, by my logic anyway. And I absolutely may be wrong here, but these were the thoughts that I was having. So we read in Revelation, the context that we read in Revelation, and it's talking about the beast. We'll jump in partway through chapter 17, verse 8. The inhabitants of the earth whose names had not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world will be astonished when they see the beast. So this verse suggests that the names of the righteous existed in the book of life from the beginning of creation itself. And reading in Romans 8, verse 29, for those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified. So I'm definitely not going to jump into the topic of predestination. It's beyond the scope of this talk. But it is an incredibly nuanced, I guess, theological topic for study. However, if we do accept that God exists outside of time and is not subject to it, then it's actually possible to postulate that both two things can be true at the same time. That the saints are predestined for salvation from the beginning of creation is true. And at the same time, in this existence, we do have 100% full free will and autonomy in our mortal experience, as it unfolds as we perceive it through time. So as you can see, I've absolutely gone down a rabbit hole. Putting this exhortation together was very peculiar, as I said, and there was plenty I wanted to refine in it before I presented it, but life had other plans. But everything I've said, hopefully some of it will be at least interesting to you. But in reality, what are the implications of time in our life? We accept that our mortal existence is limited, but our Creator is not. And that should give us strength, and it should give us hope. And I'm sure many of us sitting here today have lived through experiences in life where we have prayed so hard for something, desperately prayed for something that we need, only to find that that prayer was never answered by God. However, I'm sure many of us who have been in that experience have seen, sometimes many, many years later, that what we were asking for was not what God had planned for us. And that what God had planned was so mind-blowingly bigger and beyond what we, in that point in time in our mortal existence, were so absorbed by. And to me, that gives us hope and it gives us courage. The outcome might be completely different to what we ever anticipated or imagined for now. And in the long run, it can be so different in so many ways. With the passage of time, we can see God's plan playing out in our lives. And to us here, when the emotions are so big and the moments feel so big, the moments of joy, the moments of pain, it's easy to forget that the moment will be gone. So when you look at it like that, essentially we are here experiencing our daily trials, but our God, our Creator, exists so far beyond those, and he sees the bigger picture. Essentially, we are here playing tiddlywinks in our life, and he's playing four-dimensional chess. And to me, that's a really comforting thought, that when things overwhelm us, and when it's hard to see your way through, that our Creator knows that way through, that God has a plan, and while it might not be comfortable now, it's not by any means all for nothing. And Jesus himself struggled, and there are many examples in Scripture of Jesus struggling in his mortal existence. He knew his Father's plan, but in those moments when emotions and pain swell, even Jesus prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." That's an acknowledgement of God's wider plan. It was his Father's will that he would die on the cross. The cup would not be taken from him. But through Jesus' suffering on the cross, sin was overcome. And as the wages of sin are death, even death itself was overcome. So this morning, we are here to take some time out. And we're here to remember that very sacrifice. And as we take some time to reflect that despite knowing the horrific ordeal that he was about to go through, Jesus put his faith in God and he committed himself to God's will. And in taking the bread, which represents his body, and in taking the wine, which represents his blood, we remember our Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, Brother Adam. As Adam's mentioned, the words of Solomon are quite profound, aren't they? It teaches us an important lesson that Adam brought out.